Coming up on Bridge City News, the federal Liberals have been discussing a basic income plan. Political reporter Brian Lilly says this may cost taxpayers close to $100 billion. The City of Lethbridge offers an update on the construction of our city's new fire station. And Christians are finding creative ways to attend church on Sundays during the pandemic, including by boat.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says his government took on debt so that Canadians who lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic did not have to. With some private sector analysts predicted the deficit could soar to $300 billion. Trudeau said the cost of doing nothing would have been even higher. He says his government laid the groundwork for the economy to bounce back.
When the pandemic first hit, a lot of people lost their jobs overnight. They didn't know how they were going to feed their families or pay their bills. Faced with this unprecedented challenge, our government had two options. We could sit back, let Canadians fend for themselves and hope that it would all be over soon, or we could swiftly and substantially choose to support Canadians.
Thanks to the many pandemic relief programs, the Liberals are projecting a deficit that will actually soar to $343 billion. That is a historic level and $43 billion beyond even the highest private sector predictions. Finance Minister Bill Morneau says the government expects nearly 2 million Canadians will remain out of work this year as the COVID-19 pandemic drags down the economy.
The reality is that we've faced an enormous shock to our system. We know that the federal government was in the best position to deliver support at scale and with speed. Our principle has been to get support to people quickly and simply, and we believe that we've been able to satisfy that goal. Now, we know also that the federal government, by taking on this role, by taking on the debt, it meant that Canadians, challenged Canadians, didn't have to take on nearly as much debt in their households, and the corporate sector didn't need to take on nearly as much debt. We think it was the appropriate thing for the federal government to do in this time.
Analysts say Canada's net debt is expected to hit $1.2 trillion. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says Canada cannot afford for the Liberals to mishandle the economy by keeping benefits in place that remove incentives to go back to work. Scheer called for the Liberals to adopt a Conservative proposal to offer a back-to-work bonus. The NDP and Green Party want aid programs to remain in place to help Canadians who have lost their jobs. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer says if our country goes to a basic income for the next 6 months, it could cost close to $100 billion. Political reporter Brian Lilly says, that's a pretty big hit for taxpayers.
If it was a basic income for Ontario, Ontario's 40% of the country's population. So for 6 months, it would be $40 billion, according to the PBO. That's just for 6 months. This move, there's going to be a lot of political pressure on the Trudeau Liberals to bring this in permanently. This shows how expensive and dangerous it would be.
Mr. Lilly will also have more on the controversial $912 million contract the Trudeau Liberals offered to We Charity. That is coming up after Business News. The Auditor General says that $2.4 billion in federal student loans were in default last year. Karen Hogan wants Ottawa to step up its loan recovery efforts so taxpayers won't be left on the hook. She says Canada Revenue Agency's hands are tied in recovering outstanding loans because it does not have the same powers it does for recovering unpaid income taxes. A former member of the Alberta Legislature who gave up his seat for Alberta Premier Jason Kenney will be headed to Texas. Kenney appointed Dave Rodney as Alberta's Agent General. Officials say the role is to drive energy investment and business to our province. Rodney stepped down at the UCP member for Calgary Lougheed in 2017 so Kenney could run in that constituency. The government says Rodney starts his 3-year term immediately, and once the border with the U.S. reopens, he will move to Houston, Texas.
Texas is Alberta's second largest export market in the United States, and it is vital we have an in-market presence to lead Alberta's efforts to expand our commercial ties to the region. With his extensive government experience and his personal drive, Alberta needs someone like Dave who will engage with American business leaders and investors and put Alberta's interests first.
Rodney will receive a monthly salary of just over $19,000. He was also the first Canadian to climb Mount Everest twice. On his way home from a business trip yesterday, Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister admitted that he broke COVID-19 rules at our country's largest airport that require masks to be worn inside the terminal at all times. Photos show Pallister speaking with federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer at Pearson International Airport in Mississauga. Neither were wearing face masks, which was mandatory since June 1st. In a statement issued by his office, Pallister says it was an error and it won't happen again. A hospital in Edmonton says it no longer is admitting patients due to a full outbreak of COVID-19. The outbreak at the Misericordia Community Hospital was first declared by Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health on June 23rd, and restrictions were tightened as case numbers increased. The hospital says that as of this morning, 20 patients and 15 staff have tested positive. 3 patients have died. The province updated its COVID-19 numbers today. Government officials say there were 46 new cases of the coronavirus, along with 1 new death. Across Alberta, there are 608 active cases. There are 88 here in the South Zone. The province has also completed just over 500,000 COVID-19 tests. Close to 8,500 people were diagnosed with the virus, but fortunately, just over 7,700 have now recovered. The farmers' market has been in full swing at Exhibition Park since June. There are more new measures that the park is implementing for farmers market vendors in order to combat COVID-19. Face shields and masks are being encouraged for vendors who come to the farmers market, and they must go through a COVID-19 screening process before they can set up.
Up until this point, we had self-disclosure on any potential symptoms, and that has worked well for us. But given the recent concerns that have existed here in Southern Alberta, we have taken it to mandatory written screenings by each member of every vendor booth, starting with this Saturday's market. As well, we do see a lot of our consumers and our vendors wearing masks. We do encourage mask wearing. At this point, we haven't mandated it. It is something we may look to do in the future should the situation remain.
Exhibition Park is also looking to move touchless transactions for vendors moving forward. Crews are working hard towards the construction of the new $10 million fire hall in West Lethbridge. The new facility will include 3 drive-through bays, living quarters, training, along with administrative and support services. Lethbridge Fire Chief Mark Rathwell says his new fire hall was made in part due to a much-needed demand in response from the community of West Lethbridge. There is only one fire hall on the west side.
From the west side, we've had one station trying to cover almost half the population of the city. So this is going to absolutely bolster our ability to respond, not just on the west side, but throughout the city in terms of staffing levels at fire scenes and at EMS scenes. It's critical that we get enough staff on scene to get all the work done so we can protect whether it's a fire scene or whether it's an EMS scene, to make sure we have the right sort of people and tools there at the right time to support our community.
This project is going quite well. The last time we did an update was pre-COVID and things were going good and we didn't know what to expect, and 4 months later we've been able to maintain the schedule. We've fortunately material supplies, so far we have not had any impact with the COVID. There's been a few things we've had to work around and obviously some different safety rules and protocols on site, but overall the project is, we've been able to maintain the schedule despite weather and as well as the COVID.
Fire Station number 2 in West Lethbridge was completed in 1980. And with the addition of this new fire hall, it'll be the first new one built in 40 years on the west side of the city. The city of Lethbridge is trying to keep the Old Man River clean of debris and other harmful bacteria. They're challenging residents to adopt a storm drain. You can pick up which storm drain in your neighborhood to adopt, and it's all done online.
In the map, you will zoom in on your computer to where you live, at which point you'll find a storm drain in your area or any other area in the city that you can adopt any storm drain. It'll show you which ones are available and which ones are already being adopted. But you click on it and you click adopt, and then you fill out all your information, just your name and email address. Then you watch a What Gutter Buddy video. After you've done the online portion, you'll need some supplies in order to clean the storm drain. Some gloves, garbage bag, maybe a small shovel, depending on how clogged the storm drain is. We want to make sure that you're being safe.
For more information on how you can adopt a storm drain, visit the City of Lethbridge website. The University of Lethbridge announced that its fitness center will be reopening in a limited capacity beginning on Monday. Officials say weight machines have been spread out to allow for physical distancing, as have the benches and spin bikes. For the climbing wall, Users will be required to wear a mask when climbing and to physically distance when using the ropes. The university says each person will also need to book a time slot in advance to control the number of people using the facility. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the province enforced a number of restrictions on those who attend church, including no singing and physical distancing measures. Now, with churches slowly reopening, worshipers are excited to be back. The Gate Church opened its doors this past Sunday. Pastor Blair Stretch was reminded of what fellowship is really all about.
One of the key aspects of any church, and hopefully our church as well, is this idea of a Christian community. And so one of the words for that in scriptures is family, right? We call ourselves a church family, and we're diverse, but we're also very closely knit. Looking forward to the reopen on July 5th. There was just so much excitement and anticipation to just being together, even though we knew that it wasn't going to be exactly the same as it was before. That almost doesn't really matter anymore. We just want to see one another and be in each other's presence.
Since there is still a limited capacity, the Gate Church is asking people to register for service online at thegate.org. 2 people charged following a protest at the Jumbo Valley Hutterite Turkey Farm last September received conditional discharges. The man from Edmonton and the woman from Calgary are banned from coming within 50 meters of anywhere animals are kept and must perform 50 hours of community service. A third person from Pincher Creek will appear in Lethbridge Provincial Court on Friday for a plea. The 3 were charged before the province tightened up trespassing laws to increase maximum fines to $200,000 and possible jail time for a first offense. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says the peaceful arrest of an armed intruder at Rideau Hall last week, compared with other incidents that have ended in violent deaths of Indigenous people and people of color, indicates system discrimination in policing in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's working on eliminating discrimination, and it's a major priority for his government.
What happened as the details emerged, and I was looking at some of the details yesterday, it is just incredible that someone could ram the gates of the premises, could ram the gates, show up with weapons, be radicalized as a domestic. I think this is domestic terrorism. Is what happened, and then what also is something that reminds us all of how systemic racism is real. This person showed up with weapons publicly at the residence of the Prime Minister of Canada and was arrested without being killed. And in the same time period, in this past month, I give you one concrete example. We had an elderly, racialized man, Ijaz Chowdhury, whose family called out for mental health support. Police showed up and killed this man in his own home when he was alone. That contrast, someone showed up to potentially kill the Prime Minister of Canada or with weapons at his residence, and that person was arrested without any violence, and you had a person in his own home was killed. That to me is what systemic racism in policing is all about.
Crown prosecutors in Halifax have dropped charges against a woman who accused police of racial profiling after she was arrested at a Walmart. Santina Rao was facing charges of disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer from an incident last January. The 23-year-old said she became upset when police accused her of concealing items while shopping in the store.
I really had no idea that so many people would actually care, and when my story was put out there, I thought that every single person that would approach me about it would ask me 1,001 questions about what happened, and he said, she said, and everything, and so many people just didn't care about that, and they just cared about the fact that I was hurt and I was assaulted and my children witnessed it. I'm not entirely completely free in that means as I would like to feel. Complete freedom from this instance would be that the police involved would be held accountable and that Walmart would also be held accountable.
6 months after the novel coronavirus started spreading around the world, desperation rather than information is still driving many decisions about how to best treat the disease.
It's another grim milestone for a pandemic that
the U.S. has crossed a jarring milestone in the virus.
Restrictions, as many health experts warn the pandemic is far from over.
Out of desperation, people have been studying every imaginable therapy. Some of the studies are really kind of wacky.
Normally, when we do randomized trials, we ask patients to volunteer to have essentially a 50-50 chance of receiving a drug or an alternative, for example, placebo or just nothing at all. People had an epidemic in front of them and were not prepared to wait.
When I was finally alert enough to know, what was going on, I couldn't barely even walk to the bathroom. It actually hurt when I took a breath in and stuff. When they come in, they offered me this, this drug that really nobody knew what would it do. I said, well, what do I have to lose at this point? So I agreed to go ahead and try it.
Is a little bit like what Amazon or Google is using when it's trying to make guesses about, you chose this, I think you'll like this. It really is about trying to understand what's the most probable successful therapy. And so the trial adjusts over time to make it more likely that the therapies that are working best will be offered most often.
COVID-19 hospitalizations in Texas have more than doubled over the past couple of weeks. They now have more than 10,000 new cases of the coronavirus. Some city leaders warn that hospitals could soon be overflowing. As we hear in this next report, there are many challenges hospital staff in Texas face on a daily basis to help save people's lives.
As coronavirus numbers surge in Houston, the battle to save lives is increasingly uphill.
Okay, I'm calling this faultless electrical activity for recording.
Doctors and nurses at United Memorial Medical Center tried to save a 66-year-old widow.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, come on, good.
Her oxygen levels falling rapidly, her vital signs declining. Before she fell unconscious, she told staff she may have contracted the deadly virus from the dozens of people who gathered for her husband's recent funeral and expressed her regrets for having such a large gathering. Despite their best efforts to revive her, she dies.
Thank you, everybody.
The other thing is that you need to understand is that in coronavirus, 1 minute you're looking great, and the next minute you are gone.
The seriously ill continue to fill up intensive care beds in the nation's biggest cities, including San Antonio and Houston, where leaders worry hospitals could be overwhelmed within days. In all, Texas has recorded close to 2,700 deaths and more than 200,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus.
We have seen an exponential increase in the number of cases that we've had of COVID. The hospital has had to expand. I mean, we started first at 46 beds, then we went to 58, now we're at 88 beds. And even though it sounds like a lot of beds, it's not enough.
Life hangs in the balance inside the hospital's coronavirus unit. Just next door to where Dr. Joseph Verone, the chief medical officer at UMMC, tried to save a life, is a patient he thinks is on the mend.
It's horrifying because you can't get your breath.
51-year-old Latanya Robinson, a nurse, thinks she caught the disease from her own son.
Some people have light symptoms, some people don't have symptoms, but those who do get the symptoms, it's like death.
Another patient, Celeste Glover, says she took every precaution to avoid getting sick.
I didn't even go to the grocery store because I have underlying health conditions. My son would go to the grocery store. Did everything in my power, and here I am.
The hospital allowed the Associated Press inside access.
And we are trying to tell people, keep your safe distance, use your mask, wash your hands. They don't do it. They think this is a hoax. Anybody that thinks that this is a hoax needs to come and spend the day with me here.
To show how the pandemic is stretching resources, resilience,
she's not.
And emotions.
And I am very sorry for your loss.
Delivering heartbreaking news to coronavirus patients' families has been a constant for Dr. Verone.
That's the one thing that you don't want to do when you're a doctor. But you gotta do it. I mean, somebody has to do it.
He's worked more than 100 days straight without rest. John Moan, Associated Press, Houston.
As many people gathered for church this past Sunday in Virginia Beach, Some came by boat by what is being called boat church. As we hear in this next report, it is the chance for congregants to worship waterside during the COVID-19 pandemic.
It was a picture-perfect morning as Virginia Beach woke up to the sounds of worship on the water.
For those torn between being outside on a beautiful summer day and going to church, Boat Church here at the Narrows at First Landing State Park in Virginia Beach offers the perfect solution.
We have just really missed being in church, as I'm sure so many families have, and we have 4 kids, so for them to be able to be out here on a beautiful day and worship and hear the word and play on the beach, it's just been a really special morning on Father's Day for sure.
For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son.
Several local churches are taking part in Boat Church. Sunday, Adam Cates, the preacher at Big House Church, gave a message on God's love.
In the Gospels, Jesus preached some of his best messages from a boat. There's a reason people come to the shore, come to the beach, or love to get out on their boat. There's something that connects us in the spirit through water.
Organizer and former Governor Bob McDonnell says the inspiration for Boat Church came from a similar experience he had at Smith Mountain Lake, Virginia.
We kind of copied the Smith Mountain Lake Boat Church idea and started the planning about a year ago. We think this is just providential that the planning ended up with this concept to start in the middle of a pandemic when people were looking for a way to be together to worship.
Co-organizer Cheryl McCluskey says the hope of Boat Church is also to inspire those who don't know the Lord.
I've always wanted to bring in people that don't believe in the Lord and people that don't go to church on Sundays, and if we're touching one person, then this is worth it, and we're just so pleased.
Boat Church plans to meet every Sunday at 10 a.m. at First Landing State Park until September 6th. Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Virginia Beach.
What a cool idea. It was a beautiful day. If you were a duck today, fortunately the rain should be tapering off. Complete weather details are coming up. We had rain in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Tonight in Lethbridge, clearing with a low near 8. Tomorrow mainly sunny with a high expected near 25. Friday, sunshine again with a high of 23. A beautiful weekend is shaping up. Sunshine at 28 degrees on Saturday, sunny and 24 degrees on Sunday. Just a few clouds at 22 for both Monday and Tuesday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 25 degrees with an average low of 10. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2001 at 33 degrees, and the record low was 4 degrees in 1971. Sunrise was at 5:34, sunset at 9:39. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect light showers at a high of 20 degrees for Victoria, heavy rain and 20 as well for Vancouver. A chance of thunder showers and 22 for Calgary on Thursday, rain and 21 for Edmonton. A slight chance of showers and 21 as well for Regina, overcast and 21 for Saskatoon. A mixture of sun and cloud and 26 degrees for Winnipeg. Central Canada was under another heat warning today, much of the same picture tomorrow. Toronto will be hot again with a high expected near 35. Sunny and 34 for both Ottawa and Montreal. Clearing and 30 degrees for Fredericton. Showers and 24 expected in Halifax on Thursday. 22 and light rain for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly cloudy day tomorrow with a high near 19. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says Canada's unemployment rate peaked at 11% in the second quarter amid the recession caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The OECD says that topped the previous peak of 8.7% in the third quarter during the 2009 financial crisis. It says jobs should return as lockdowns end, but it still expects an unemployment rate of close to 8% by the end of next year. It warns it may rise to 8.4% if there's a second wave of infections. Two of Canada's largest railways say they moved record quantities of grain after benefiting from another strong month in June. CN Railway says it is on pace for record shipments of grain this crop year. CP Railway says it moved a record 8.41 million tons last quarter after shipping 2.76 million tons of grain and grain products in June. The railways ramped up shipments of Western grain by using larger hopper cars and trains, while customers have been investing in elevator networks to accommodate 8,500-foot trains. David's Tea has asked the courts in Canada and the United States for protection from creditors while it restructures. Company officials say they want to reduce the number of stores, but will continue operating online through its website and its wholesale distribution channel. It had warned in mid-June that it could begin a formal restructuring depending upon the outcome of its talks with landlords. It said at that time it has not paid rent since its stores were closed in March due to the coronavirus pandemic. Legendary jeans maker Levi's says it will cut about 15% of its worldwide corporate workforce as it deals with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. The San Francisco-based company says the layoffs of 700 office positions will save the company around $100 million a year. It will not affect workers at its stores or factories. Levi Strauss & Co. said its second quarter revenue fell 62% to $497.5 million. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 33 points on the day to finish at 15,629. The Dow was up 177 points to 26,067. The S&P 500 was up 24 points to 3169. And the Nasdaq was up 148 points to finish at 10,492. Oil was up 26 cents to $40.88 per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to $1.82. Gold was down 8 cents to $18.0881 an ounce. And silver was unchanged at $18.72 an ounce. Wheat is at $238 per metric ton. Barley's at $240. Canola's at $4.59. And corn is at $236 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 85 cents to $99.02. Feeder cattle were down $1.23 to $134.93, and lean hogs were down 93 cents to $47.95. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 74 cents US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, thanks to the many pandemic relief programs, the Liberals are projecting a deficit will soar to over $343 billion. That is a historic level, and $43 billion even beyond the highest private sector predictions. Finance Minister Bill Morneau says the government expects nearly 2 million Canadians will remain out of work this year as the COVID-19 pandemic drags down the economy. The federal government has been discussing a basic income plan to help Canadians for the next 6 months. Political reporter Brian Lilly explains what that will potentially look like in just a moment. In the face of the We Charity scandal comes word that the federal government will not explain the process for awarding the $912 million contract. To talk more about this is political reporter Brian Lilly. Brian joins me from Toronto. Brian, the Liberals said they were being open and transparent?
Yeah, well, that's what they claim, and this is a buzz phrase that they've loved to use since they were running for office in 2015. After they took office in 2015, they've always said we're open and transparent. We're the most open and transparent. Yeah, governments like to say this. Oh, when they're in opposition, they love to say it. When they're new governments, they love to say it. Look, each government is successively less open than the previous one, and the Trudeau Liberals are no exception. And so in the We fiasco that's unfolding, where they awarded a $912 million sole source contract to friends of the Prime Minister. In the case of Mark and Craig Kielburger, the founders of We, who still run the organization, you would expect that the government would say, okay, well, here's the contract. No, they have rejected claims by the media, by the opposition, to do so. So, at Commons Committee this week, Peter Julian, New Democrat MP, put forward a motion calling for the contract, any communications related to the contract, and more to be tabled with the House of Commons no later than August the 8th. It passed unanimously, so that's going to come forward. Now, they can hold back some information. They can do redactions, but the motion says that can't be done by the Prime Minister's office. It has to be done by the law clerk and the House of Commons staff, not political staff. We'll see if they go through with that. We'll find out much more than the government ever wanted us to.
Now, since the We Charity story broke, there have been lots of allegations directed towards the group from disgruntled former staffers, Brian, claiming they now work with organizations that use child labor.
There have been all kinds of allegations, and the organization hasn't done a good job of responding to media questions at all. I put in queries about their real estate holdings because I looked at their financials, and I noticed that between 2013 and the end of August 2019, they went from $11.9 million in fixed assets that they held to $43.7 million in land and buildings in Canada alone. So I asked them basic questions like, how did you amass so much real estate? Did donors know that money was being used for this? Things of that nature. I heard back not from a PR staff member, but from their defamation lawyer.
Wow.
And I can tell you in 20 years, I've never received a response to a media inquiry from a defamation lawyer, never mind an in-house counsel that wasn't an attempt to shut down a story. So yeah, there have been allegations that they work, or media stories that they work with child organizations, companies that use child labor. Not that they do, but they've partnered with them. That's been one allegation. There have been former staffers who are people of color who have come forward and said they were not treated properly. Just on Tuesday, a young gay man came forward and said he was treated improperly. He wasn't given respect. All of these things that, if true, and we don't know yet, these are simply allegations, they don't match the brand put forward by the Kielburgers or we. So this is going to be all very difficult and very uncomfortable. This one contract, and they've received a lot of sole source contracts from this Trudeau government. This one contract has led to a bunch of questions that may finally shine a light on an organization that has been able to get away with doing whatever they want, good or bad, for a long time now.
Brian, our country's parliamentary budget officer says if Canada goes to a basic income for 6 months after the emergency response benefit expires, it could cost us up to $100 billion. You thought we were in debt before.
Yeah, well, don't exaggerate, Hal. It's not $100 billion, it's just $98 billion. I mean, so almost 100, and that's only for half a year. So, there have been people calling saying, well, we just need to do a basic income. The pandemic proves that this is what we need to move towards. There's long been a call for this. Pierre Trudeau experimented with it in a small town in Manitoba back in the 70s. It got shelved by the Trudeau Liberals back then. The Wynne Liberals in Ontario had brought in a basic income, and the Ford Conservatives, when they got in power, they scrapped it, saying it's going to cost $17 billion or more, and it's just too much money. We don't have it. People said, "Oh, how can you claim it'll cost so much?" If it was a basic income for Ontario, Ontario's 40% of the country's population. So for 6 months, it would be $40 billion, according to the PBO. That's just for 6 months. This move, there's going to be a lot of political pressure on the Trudeau Liberals to bring this in permanently. This shows how expensive and dangerous it would be.
Wouldn't this basic income also deter people from returning to work?
It absolutely would, because some people may get more money on it than they would working part-time. And look, you need part-time workers, you need full-time workers in all types of industries. I remember covering a story on the Ontario basic income when it was in place, and a man who had been working for one of the big banks for several years. And maybe he thought it was a dead-end job, but I know the big banks, and there are opportunities to move up. He'd spent 5 to 7 years with this bank and quit his job, full-time job, to go on the basic income and design graphics for people for free, or for yoga lessons and breathing exercises. And these weren't things I was making up. This is what he was bragging about. So yes, of course, it will deter people from working, which is one of the many reasons that it has never really been implemented in a big way in Western society.
Canadians sneering at our brothers and sisters south of the border may want to rethink their sneering tactics. According to a new international poll, Americans, more than Canadians, Brian, are more likely to wear masks during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and Canada is at the bottom of the pack. This is a YouGov poll. YouGov is a major British polling firm. And, you want to know who's going to win the British election? They're one of the firms you go to. They've got Ipsos like we have, but YouGov is one of their organizations. They did a poll, 29 different countries. We're only above 6 of those countries when it comes to wearing a mask. 58% of Canadians said in the middle of June, yes, I'm wearing a mask regularly when I go out. 71% of Americans said they were wearing a mask. So, it's bizarre the way that we in this country, whether it's, as individuals or as our media, try to look at how America's doing. We only compare ourselves to that. America's doing better than many other parts of the world, or has done. Parts like New York have done horribly compared to other parts of the world. But we just look at America and we say, well, we're better than them. Not always. Watch your smugness.
You know, what's interesting is the fact that the Alberta government announced 20 million more masks will be dished out, given to a lot of the fast food restaurants, A&W, McDonald's. You can actually go in and order a 4-pack of masks with your fries. So it remains to see what's going to happen here. But, you know, let's talk about Ontario, what's happening there. A lot of Ontario's population today, masks will become mandatory to be worn indoors. Bylaws passed, what, Toronto and Ottawa?
Yeah, so it's Toronto, Mississauga, the big city next door, Brampton, the whole region of Peel, so going west towards Burlington, Ottawa, Cornwall, the rest of rural Eastern Ontario, they, as of Tuesday at 12:01, so from Tuesday on, have to wear masks in indoor public settings. Now, Hal, I'm not opposed to wearing a mask. I've been carrying one with me for weeks now. I put it on when I need it. If I'm in enclosed spaces and can't social distance, I'll pull out the mask, I'll throw it on. But what bugs me is that these are the same people who, when this really would have helped in March or April, were telling us not to wear masks. You know, we're down to, you know, we're not, you know, ahead of the game like Alberta is, but most of our major hospitals in Toronto, no people in ICU for COVID-19. On Monday, 0 deaths reported in the province of Ontario. The numbers are falling everywhere, and now suddenly in the middle of July, we're told, well, now you got to wear a mask. Why not in April or March when cases were really high? To me, this is just going to the politicization of science, and it's doing it for political reasons. And I think, you know, I wonder, are people going to trust the authorities next time when they've received so many mixed messages during this pandemic?
You know, so many people, young people I know today, Brian, have downloaded the TikTok app and they're dancing out in the streets, putting it on the social media platform. Now, the US, India, and other countries have warned against this Chinese-based social media platform over security concerns. How about our country's public safety minister, Bill Blair? Will Canada issue a similar warning?
No, he's not going to. Now, I didn't get TikTok. Maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's that I view social media as something for work. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. If there's a way for me to harness social media for my work, then I'm on there. But I looked at TikTok, went, there's no way for me to use this for work. I'm busy enough as it is. I didn't realize that this is backed by a Chinese company close to the government in Beijing. And for a while now, I only noticed it when India announced that they're blocking TikTok in India and that they claim there are security concerns. Of course, India and China having a bit of a Cold War, a bit of a shooting war, but also a Cold War along their border. So you have to consider that. But then I started looking, and the United States and others have said there are security concerns about TikTok stealing your data. So if you're on a corporate phone and you've got TikTok, who knows what secrets they're going to be pulling out of there. I'm glad I didn't get on it. If your kids are on it, maybe you want to start looking at the privacy settings.
China's technology giant Huawei has been in the news quite a bit as we continue to discuss the extradition of one of their executives, Meng Wanzhou, to the United States. Brian, American business giant Bloomberg says Huawei's rise was at the expense of one-time Canadian telecommunications giant Nortel.
This has been looked at by Canadian media in the past, Hal. I think National Post did an extensive series on it, but for the American media giant Bloomberg to jump in, and this was a big takeout piece that, and Bloomberg's a major wire service. It's read in, throughout the business community in ways that Canadian media aren't. This goes international, and they did a deep dive into this and said, yeah, it looks like they're, the hacks that took down Nortel, and those hacks have been talked about extensively, that may have benefited Huawei, and in a couple of ways. Concerns that some of the data stolen was eventually handed over to Huawei, but also it helped bring down the company. I'll tell you how extensive the spying from China was on Nortel. When their main campus in Ottawa, they were based out of Brampton outside of Toronto, they had a huge research and development campus in the west end of Ottawa. And eventually that was taken over by National Defense after Nortel went bust. It was big enough for our military to move in there as their sole headquarters. Wow. They had to debug the place, and they found so many bugs. So the fall of Nortel benefited Huawei in a couple of ways. The potential for those hacks of key information over a decade to be handed directly to Huawei, but also It allowed them to go in and scoop up engineers. As many as 20 top engineers moved over from Nortel to Huawei at the end, including the guy who holds the record for patents at Nortel, hundreds of patents.
Wow. Former NDP Ontario Premier Bob Rae got another appointment, this time as Canada's ambassador to the United States. Brian, were some in Ottawa a little surprised by this announcement?
I doubt many were, and I wasn't, although I feel like I was the only one maybe criticizing the fact that Bob Rae got this appointment. Look, I've covered Bob Rae for a long time. He's a very smart man. He's a very thoughtful man. I have a lot of good things to say about him. But I also know his record, and here in Ontario, where he was premier from 1990 to 1995, he was a disaster. And despite the fact that voters rejected him at the end, and his government had such a horrible record, he just racks up appointment after appointment. Advise the government on this, advise the government on that. Well, now he gets to go and do a job that he's probably dreamed of since he was a little boy, be Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, or maybe not a little boy. By the time his father got the job, his father was a career diplomat for Canada. By the time his father got to the UN for Pierre Trudeau in 1972, I believe it was, Bob was a fully grown man. In fact, he was about to enter federal politics the first time as a New Democrat MP, who eventually brought down Joe Clark's government with a non-confidence motion in 1979.
Would this maybe help Canada in the future get that UN Security Council seat?
I think we'd be wise not to run for it in the future. The latest Trudeau move, of course, after much criticism of Stephen Harper's failure to get it, Canada got fewer votes than Harper did back in 2010. Let's just leave it alone for a while.
Political journalist with the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilly, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
As Christians, most of us are familiar with evangelistic outreaches, but could you imagine a 4-day Christian event taking place simultaneously across the entire African continent? The numbers would be staggering. To chit-chat a bit about it is Jennifer Wild. She's president of the group One God, One Day, One Africa. Jen joins us from Florida. Welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much, Hal, for having me. It's a blessing and an honor to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. Good to have you here. So tell me a bit about this event. What is it all about?
Well, it's actually the largest Christian outreach in history. Nothing like this has ever been done, ever attempted. People have covered countries a lot of times here and there, but nobody has ever actually done an entire continent of anywhere yet. So this is the entire continent of Africa. And we are partnering with many, many churches, ministries, evangelists, pastors all over the world, actually. They adopt a country, one country, there's 54 countries in Africa. We'll be in as many live as possible with miracle festivals. So these will be outreaches where a church adopts, say, Kenya. And that church, the pastor or the evangelist or the head of the missionary agency will go over there, preach the gospel, hold a miracle festival for 3 to 5 days. I know you said 4 days, so it's 3 to 5 days, whatever they would like. And that will be live streamed TV and radio to that country while they're doing it on those 4 nights, day 4. But on the last night, all across, so we'll be having these live miracle festivals in every country simultaneously on these nights. And on the last one, we will live stream TV, radio from 4 different locations around Africa, north, south, east, west, and about 15 minutes apiece or whatever across the entire continent. Hence, one God, one day, one Africa.
Now, Jennifer, I understand that this event arose from a vision you received all the way back in 1980. Tell me a bit more about that.
I was living in Hollywood. I was an actress and a model. I was completely lost. I didn't know anything about God, had never set foot in church. And one day I was at a big Hollywood party, and my best friend, who was married to the top movie star of the day, who won the Golden Globe Awards that year, he was actually a heroin addict. He came out, he threw a piece of paper at me when I was leaving, and I was always, there was always a hole in my heart. I was always, and I didn't know anything about God or Jesus. I had never set foot in a church, came from a wealthy family, had everything, but I was completely lost. And he said, "Here, Jennifer, maybe this will do you some good." He was Italian. He threw it at me, a tract. I'll never forget it. It was David Wilkerson, and it said, "The two of me, the struggle with sin." And, I said, "Very funny, Ray." I went home. I put it in my pocket the next day after being hungover and doing drugs and the whole thing. Back then, everybody was. It was horrible, a horrible time. But, I pulled it out, and it said the struggle with sin. And it was strange how, because I knew I had sin a lot, but I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. So I opened it and I started reading that, and it talked about heaven and hell and God and Jesus, and that you would live forever for eternity. And it said that it's your choice where you're going to go, heaven or hell, and you pick. And it said, all you have to do is believe and receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior and be sorry for your sins. That's it. That's all you have to do. And you will be in heaven for eternity. And it was like, wow, that's all I have to do. And I thought, you know what? What if this is true? What if all these millions of Christians around the world are right, and there is a heaven and hell? We do live forever. Well, it scared me to death. I knew I was on my way to hell, and I did not want to go there. No way, no how. And so it said, say this little prayer at the end: receive Jesus, accept him into your heart, be sorry for your sins. I said, okay, I'm sorry for the bad things I've done. And I received him, and he completely changed my life.
So Jennifer, as you began to share your vision with leaders all the way around the world, what are some of the responses you received to it?
Well, I really didn't share with a lot of people. God kind of took this whole thing. Back then, when I became a Christian, how this came about, he gave me a vision. And it was a vision of multi millions of people, as far as the eye could see, receiving Jesus as their Lord and Savior all at one time. And back then there was no internet, no phone, no nothing. It was impossible to do something like that. But I just believed him. I would just believed everything, and I said, okay, I started praying about it. And when I started making these calls, I had been a missionary in Mexico for 10 years, living out in the dirt and the trash with my kids. I didn't know anyone. I didn't do the circuit. I didn't I didn't know anything or anyone. And when God said a few years ago, now is the time to do this, I just, through circumstances, a series, he led me to Siegfried Tomaszewski, who was actually Reinhard Bonnke's CEO in Africa and Europe for many, 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 many years. I believe that nobody else in the world could do this except Siegfried. And when I talked to him about it, you asked what was the response. I got his name and number. Someone told me about him. They said, call him. I did, and he hung up on me. And I called him back, and I said, we lost the connection. And he said, no, we didn't. I hung up on you. And I said, what? Why? And he said, because it's crazy. I've never heard of anything like this. It's overwhelming. It's too big. And I said, well, you know what? God is that big. God can do anything. Don't you believe that? And he goes, okay, I'll pray about it. And the rest is history. He prayed about it.
Originally supposed to take place in May, but now with the global COVID-19 pandemic, it has been rescheduled to November 12th through the 15th. Where exactly is it going to be taking place, and how many countries and people are participating? It's huge.
Oh my goodness. As of now, we have almost every country that we can get in covered. So ministries almost, I think there's, I don't know, I don't keep up on the exact numbers. I think it's 48 out of the 54 countries we can get in. Places like Syria, we can't. North Africa, it's hard in some places. But ministries have adopted a country, so they're covered. They're raising the money, these ministries, to go over and preach the gospel at that time. We are the organizers. We're putting everything together. So we give them a boots on the ground person over there if they need it. A lot of these ministries have been working over in Africa for years. They don't need our help in that way, but some do. And then we put them together with a person who knows the government officials, all the churches and pastors, all the all the people, the media, everyone that they need to know to get this done in that country.
How do you actually go about setting up an event this large? I mean, there's a lot of things you have to consider, such as security, bathrooms, water, a solid sound system at each venue.
Absolutely. And these are done individually. They're all done at the in the countries by whoever is doing the organizing for that ministry, or if the ministry itself is organizing it with just pastors and locals and the government officials and this kind of thing. They do that. So yes, everyone has a crusade director, and those crusade directors do everything that they need to do, from all that you just said, security to everything. They're huge. It's a huge ordeal just to have one of these done in one country.
So Jennifer, what's your main goal now with One God, One Day, One Africa?
Our main goal is to see the entire continent of Africa saved, healed, delivered, set free, filled with the Holy Spirit, and following Jesus, knowing him, and surrendered and sacrificing their lives to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. From the tiniest villages to the biggest cities, everyone, everywhere.
And you believe that God is endorsing this event, that his hand is really upon this. Do you have any testimonies or stories you'd like to share along those lines?
Oh boy, there's so many, Hal, that he's done.
Just give me one.
One. Well, the main one I just told you is about getting Siegfried, the only person in the world, on board with this. But then since then, people like Heidi Baker, Reinhard Bonnke, his successor, Daniel Kalinda, who is the head of Christ for All Nations, people like that. Youth with a Mission. We have the top Wycliffe Bible translators. Everybody is on board with this. Saddleback Church, I mean, you name it, everybody's on board. Every denomination, Christian denomination, including Catholics, Baptists, non-denominational. It's about unity, and I think that's why God is endorsing this, because he's bringing everybody together, which we should have been together the whole time, but everybody's been kind of doing their own thing since the Lord
Are there going to
came.
be crusades happening in each nation in the days leading up to the event?
The event are the days. So the crusade are the events, the 3 to 5 days. And then the last day, like we said, is where it will be live streamed on that one day from 4 different areas. But the events are the live 3 to 5 days in every country on the same weekend, in the second weekend of November, like you said.
How can viewers get involved with One God, One Day, One Africa, Jennifer?
Well, they can go to our website. That's the main thing, and that's www.1gdagodDayAfrica.org and sign up. And we have a couple of spots left to adopt a country for larger churches or whoever would like to do that, evangelists, missionaries, whatever. But there's so many ways to get involved. Prayer is so important, Hal. We beg people, please, it's the most number one important thing that you can do is pray for this. And that's how we partner with God. And of course, we always need more funds. Everybody does, but and then people can come. We invite every single person to get involved. If they would like to come to one of the countries and be involved, boots on the ground during the event, they can be in a prayer team. There's all different ways to get involved. Many different ways to be there in November with us.
So Jennifer, after the event wraps up, it doesn't end there. Let's talk about the plan to plant some churches and disciple new believers.
Absolutely. That is so important. And we are partnering with people like Saddleback Church, who has, I think they have 10 to 20 countries in Africa right now where they're doing follow-up. We, of course, have our own follow-up booklets that we will be passing out.
So Jennifer, it's One God, One Day, One Africa. How about potentially in the future doing One God, One Day, One America? So all of the Americas, North, Central America, South America, and then maybe someday down the road doing all of Europe. How about that too?
That is so funny you said that, Hal, because everybody's saying that. You know, people are saying, okay, when this is done, what's next? If the Lord tarries, you know, it's in God's hands. We're available as long as we have breath. We will be serving the Lord, doing whatever He calls us to do. And that's absolutely, we're talking about it, you know, possibly South America, Central America next, Europe, possibly, like you said, and next. We don't know. But we'll be in ministry until the Lord comes back.
And when you do one in Australia, New Zealand, let me know. I'll join you for that one.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm excited for that too.
Jennifer Weil, president of One God, One Day, One Africa. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Hal, and God bless you and God bless everyone. Please join us.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. As you said, God bless, and thanks so much for joining us.